Well, we're talking about lesson 47 and about Peter, the Apostle Peter, the disciple Peter, Peter the Rock. But his name wasn't always the Rock. In fact, Jesus named him the Rock. His name was Simon, and Simon was meant sifting sand. Most likely, Jesus really didn't like that name, sifting sand, for Peter, so he gave him that nickname, the Rock. You know, sometimes God changes our names, and he did with Peter. But Peter expressed a faith that someday he would be that rock in the new church. And we're going to talk about that too in a little bit. But let's talk about Simon Peter when a few times Jesus had to rebuke the rock. Or, rebuke means that he had to say, hey, that's not right. Or he had to reprove him in some way. Once, when Jesus was talking about the suffering that he would do on the cross and that he would die, and Peter said, no way, there's no way I'm going to let you die. No way. And Jesus said, Peter, he said, get behind me, Satan. Because, Jesus knew that he would have to die. He rebuked Peter. Peter must have thought about that. And really later on thought that Jesus would have to die and raise again. Before Jesus was crucified, he went to that upper room where he had the Last Supper. Well, one of the first things that Jesus did was he took off his outer garment and put on this apron, and he went around to the disciples and he started washing their feet. And Peter says, no way, I'm not going to let you wash my feet. No, Lord, no. And Jesus said, oh, Peter, I have to wash your feet. I had to have anything to do with you. I need to wash your feet. And Peter said, well, then wash my whole body then. And Jesus said, no, your feet will suffice. You can imagine. So, Peter, he had that heart, and he just said what he thought, but he thought what he said, didn't he? Well, Jesus prophesied that Peter would fail him. And it would be like this test that was coming. You see, he told Peter, he said, Satan would actually sift him like wheat. But he told Peter that he would pray for him and that Peter would not fail. He told Peter, when you have come back, strengthen your brothers. Satan will tempt you, and all the disciples were tempted and ran, but God will bring you back and make you strong again, strong and faithful. And then at that, upper room, at that Last Supper, he predicted that all the disciples would fall away. And Peter said, I will never fall away. I will never desert you. I will never fail you. I will never fall. And Jesus told Peter, then he said, but you will deny me 3 times, Peter. After the cock crows, the rooster crows, twice you will have denied me 3 times. Peter probably was sad at that, thought, no way, I'm not going to do that. And then in the garden, as Jesus went in the garden, I told you before that Jesus was in agony, and all of the disciples that he brought, actually it was Peter, James, and John, but they fell asleep. And then the temple guards came to get them. And they came, and as Peter said, I am he, and was going to actually just go with them, Jesus was just going to go with them. What does Peter do? He gets off his sword and says, I will fight for you. Bam! And he cuts off the servant, the high priest's servant's, Malchus, a young guy's ear. And right away, Jesus says, well, Peter, you need to put away your sword. We're not in here. We're not in here for this rebellion here. You need to put away your sword. And he took Malchus' ear, and he healed Malchus' ear before he went, was taken to trial for the Sanhedrin. The last thing he did there was heal his ear. How magnificent is that? And all the disciples ran away, and Peter ran away, and Jesus alone went with the temple guards. So while Jesus was in custody of the Sanhedrin under the trial, people gathered in the courtyard, and some of them recognized Peter as a follower of Jesus. And Peter denied it. He said, I don't even know him. He denied him actually 3 times. And one of those 3 times he even swore. He said, I swear to God, I don't even know him. And then what happened? Just like Jesus prophesied, the rooster crowed. And then Peter knew, and he looked in through where the temple guards were, looked in to where they held Jesus captive, and Jesus looked at him. Peter started weeping, and he ran bitterly. And see, Peter had failed just like Jesus had prophesied. And after the resurrection, you imagine Peter was crying this whole time, not at the cross. He had run away, far away, thinking that he could never be forgiven, probably. But after the resurrection, he was there with the disciples. They had gathered, wondering what to do. They didn't know, what shall we do? But then, you see, Jesus, the 3rd day, had risen from the dead. His tomb was empty, and some women had gone there, and the first witnesses were women. And Mary Magdalene, she had met Jesus in the garden, and Jesus said, go and tell Peter and my disciples. And so she ran and she told Peter. So Peter and John, they thought, and then they ran. They ran as fast as they could to the tomb of Joseph or Arimathea, where Jesus had been buried. They ran, and of course, the stone was rolled away, and so John gets there way first, and then he's, I don't think I'm going to go in. He kind of stopped like that. I think I'll wait for Peter. And Peter comes running in, and he runs right in. He looks at John and runs right in, and he sees, and John comes in, and they see there was his linens, there were his burial clothes, but Jesus had risen. He was alive. But what would they do? As they would do? Well, we know one thing that they decided to do. They started to go fishing again. Can you imagine that? They said, well, let's go fishing. And so, Peter was probably thinking about him denying, and so he took some of the disciples. We know probably John and James, of course, and some of the other disciples, and probably Andrew, the fisherman. And they went fishing, and they had caught no fish at all. And they probably were very discouraged with their heads down, because Jesus had appeared to them, had come and appeared to them, and left. They knew that he had risen, but then they didn't know what to do. So here Peter is, and the disciples, and they see this little figure kind of on the beach there, They're out on the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias, and, on the beach they see this figure, and they see him calling out to them, and the man said, you guys, have you caught any fish? And they said, no. He said, throw your nets out on the other side, just like he did before. And so they threw their nets out on the other side, and guess what? Hundreds of fish, 153 fish again, the same one. And when Peter saw that it was the Lord, John says, that's the Lord. And John just kind of held back, it's the Lord. But Peter, he takes off his outer garment, he dives into the water, he's swimming as fast as he can, and that's probably a long swim. And he swims to the beach, and there he is with Jesus, probably Jesus bringing him out and giving him a big hug. And Jesus was cooking breakfast. So you can imagine, he brought in the fish, and Jesus cooked them breakfast on the beach there. And as they were fellowshipping, Jesus became very serious. And he asked Peter 3 times. He said, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me more than these? And he said, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. But 3 times he said, do you love me? And he used the word agape. Agape means that unconditional love that Jesus has for us, a love that goes beyond this world. He used agape. But Peter said, You know I do. Yes, I do. But he used the word phileo, which means friendship. Because Peter knew in his heart he had denied him 3 times, and he didn't want to say he agape'd him yet, because he knew he had failed him. But then Jesus looked into his heart and asked him to, what is that? Excuse me for a second.